Today we are having a discussion on libertarianism, and we're starting right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for this epic discussion on libertarianism. We have two titans of political debate who are here with us today. This is, honestly, it really is, I think, maybe the most excited I've been during the discussions we've had on this channel. So, we have got Destiny, who generally, I think I don't want to say too much on their background. I'll let them kind of explain for themselves, but generally leans left. And then Adam, who identifies strongly as libertarian. And this is going to be, like I said, I'm probably going to listen to this several times afterwards. But with that, want to mention, both of these gentlemen are linked in the description. So if you enjoy what they are saying and you want to hear more, hey, I encourage you to check them out, click those links, and subscribe so that way you can hear more of their content. Also, want to mention, let's see, hopefully my audio is good. It's been a little bit rocky, so I hope you can hear me. Let me know in the live chat if anything's funky. But, want to say, lastly, feel free, if you enjoy debates on politics or religion, which we have regularly, feel free to hit that subscribe button for reminders as we're trying to build a community of people, whether they lean left or right, Christian, atheist, Jedi or Sith. We're glad to have you here. And with that, we are going to kick it off to our speakers, who they've already basically, just before, decided on a topic that they think that they already want to go to at least start. So, with that, thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. It's an honor to have you, and the floor is yours.
Well, you really set the bar high with that. You want to give us some direction for introductions?
Well, you mean like introducing the topic?
Or ourselves? I
don't know absolutely.
Your audience is familiar with our backgrounds.
Yeah, actually, if you'd like to share, I would love it, just because, especially in the regarding your views, I want to be as nuanced as possible, and I think it might be best for you guys to explain them, just so I don't generalize too much with your past views. So that as well, if you're okay with it.
Sure. Well, I'll do the best to give the quick rundown here then. I was in the Marine Corps from 1999 to 2006, and reservist 6.5 years, 3 years active duty within that, 1 tour in Fallujah, and that really got me going in activism. And I define an activist as someone who's motivated by a deep-seated sense of injustice. For me, I was a libertarian before that, but I didn't really know what it meant. It was just socially liberal, fiscally conservative, best of both worlds that are the shitty worlds of mainstream politics that most Americans want nothing to do with anyway. Not really inspiring, but for me, it was like, I'm not going to be a Republican or a Democrat. That's freaking lame. Are you kidding me? This is America. There's got to be an option. And I think it was at some point in high school, it was like, you're going to be a Republican or Democrat. My teacher was like, well, if you really have to be something else, there's these libertarians over here. They like to be left alone. And that didn't stop me from enlisting in the military or volunteering to go to Iraq. And a proper understanding of it would have. And it was the belief that libertarianism was a political philosophy rather than an ethical philosophy that kept me from really applying it properly and consistently in my life. And I think just to make it as simple as possible, when you take the word libertarian, it really just can be as inclusive as anybody who believes in freedom. And I think that's great. I think we should be inclusive with the term libertarian. To me, I have a specific understanding of that freedom is what you have when no one is forcing their will on you, when your right to live, to exercise your self-ownership, however you see fit, doesn't have any forceful interference. And what this suggests is a system of ethics that we would describe as the non-aggression principle. You own yourself. That's why it's wrong for someone to claim ownership over you like a slave or a possession or anything else. That's why it's wrong to hit you, to take your stuff. So anything that's force or fraud or coercion between one person and another person creates a win-lose relationship instead of a win-win relationship that we have with cooperative, voluntary relationship. So the ideal that's suggested here is of peace and harmony, where all human relationships are voluntary, free of force, fraud, and coercion. And so while I'm I'm happy with the more inclusive label, libertarian specifically for me, what that means. And I think for most people who really consider to have been libertarian for any period of time and really gotten to develop a coherent, cohesive worldview from that, the terms voluntarism or someone who believes in the non-aggression principle really describe the ethical philosophy that it's at the heart of what is often misconstrued as a political philosophy.
Thank you so much, Adam. And Destiny, thanks as well for both of you being on. Destiny, if you want to share about your background as well as your views, glad to have you.
Yeah, I guess I don't know how far back we're going, but I mean, I guess I've been a Twitch streamer for 10 years. We talk politics a lot. I used to be libertarian or libertarian leaning back in high school, and then I've kind of gotten a little older. I've kind of grown differently. I view things a little bit different. I mean, obviously, being on the opposite end here, I'm going to say that the state is probably necessary in order to secure any meaningful freedoms or meaningful rights. That simply having a non-aggression principle doesn't, in practice, ensure that anybody has any sort of right. Because without some sort of state to enforce laws, we're not going to be able to protect each other's freedoms, and that a group of people that are loosely bound between a non-aggression principle would never be able to resist outside influence or invasion either. So that'll probably be the position that I'll be defending here.
You bet. So with that, regarding the police issue, that was something that Adam mentioned that would be an interesting point to start with, which he had said you had interesting ideas on that. And so if you guys want to start with that, and then, like I said, feel free wherever you want to go.
I mean, I can start. I can put forth the positive, and then you can attack it if you want, or you can put forth your, I mean, whichever way you want to do.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I would say that for, so I don't know if I don't believe in any sort of like intrinsic rights. I don't think they exist, and I think that a right only exists insofar as you have the ability to secure that right. So, for instance, my ability to live a free, happy life, you can call that a right. But if I can't afford healthcare, or if I can't afford food, or if I can't afford shelter, I mean that doesn't really mean much to me. So it seems that in today's society, the best way to secure the greatest amount of freedom, economically, politically, and socially for a large number of people is through some sort of state that is supposed to have an authorization to use force on its people to ensure that we all follow laws and conduct ourselves in ways that are conducive to a society. So things like paying taxes or building where we're supposed to or living where we're supposed to and stuff like that. I would argue that these seem to be necessary things to ensure that we're like a free and prosperous people.
Well, that's very concise.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I want to go into that for hours and hours and open up so many different avenues based on that. I thought we were going to start with the police stuff because that kind of gives us a.
Oh yeah, we can start. Yeah, we can do the police as a microcosm for the NAP or something. Sure. Yeah, we can start with just police.
Well, because I really liked your commentary on this case, and I think what you're starting with is kind of a pragmatic approach, right? Of how to survive a police encounter.
Yeah.
And it's been a big part of my activism in civil disobedience to challenge police authority. And I really liked what you said, and I forget who it was that you were streaming with in that video, but that it was de-escalate first. Like, and that was the one thing you really criticized the guy who was being harassed by police in that video, was that he got irate and escalated. But you also made it clear that there's no right of the police, and you said that this was a good line, that there's a barrier here to state power, that they can't just stop you and ask for your ID. And I remember someone in your stream pointed this out to you, is that that's not entirely true. And what you're looking at is a certain federal precedent, but there are still about half a dozen states in the U.S. where they call them shall ID states, but they have shall ID laws, and Louisiana is one of them. And I didn't know this when I was there, but I was asked for an ID as a passenger in a traffic stop, refused to provide it, and was arrested for not showing ID. And I followed your advice in the sense that I said, I'm gonna de-escalate. I'm not gonna get irate. I'm not gonna yell. I'm not gonna be confrontational. And they came charging at us in this scenario, and what I saw was an opportunity. Like you said, if you feel like challenging it, sit down, say, cool, I'm going to get a lawyer. And that's what we've done in this case. We've got challenging that. So if what I would ask you is to see then if you see there's this barrier where state power is it should be limited to when there's a suspicion of having committed a crime, that you can't violate someone's right to just exist, to be somewhere without, you can't interfere with that, you can't stop them unless they've been accused of a crime or you suspect them of a crime. Like what is the moral basis that you would see for that, or are you just seeing it as legal precedent?
So the moral basis that I would view for most of these things is I don't actually intrinsically care about like a person's individual freedom or any of that as an end to itself. I see all of these as a means to achieving the end of securing the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people. And so when I say happiness, I mean like socially, so like we can go out and get jobs and go to school and travel. I mean politically, we can vote in free elections, hopefully that are not being tampered with. Economically, that we have the means to secure like work and then buy things for ourselves, like these types of things. So this is generally what I'm looking at maximizing. So when it comes to like dealing with police and like what should they be allowed to do, what shouldn't they be allowed to do, having it so that a police can like walk up and ID any person they want, I don't see a reason for it. As far as I'm aware, like the empirical data on things like stop and frisk just aren't positive. Like police use it to just abuse people. They racially target people. They don't actually like come up with any kind of meaningful charges. Like it's really dumb. But like when you talk about something like something that I was kind of back and forth on. Sometimes they do the DUI stops where they'll just have like a cop set up and like when people are driving
Yeah.
down, they just stop everybody checking from DUI. Initially, I was kind of not okay with that, but I mean, if this does a really good job at keeping drunk drivers off the road, I don't know if I want to subject, when my son becomes a teenager, I don't know if this is something that keeps other drunk drivers off the road from like colliding with them and killing him. I'm probably okay, in this case with your travel being encumbered. So.
Okay, so when I see even that bigger goal of
Mhm.
maximizing happiness, anything that you do as a central planner has, you know, all of the fallacies of central planning attached to all of the risks, all of the unintended consequences. When you say, I'm going to do something for the happiness of others, and I'm going to use that as an excuse, as I would say, and you would call it reasoning, but it sounds to me like it's an excuse to say, well, then we don't have to adhere to basic moral principles that we would suggest exist. And you say you don't believe in rights, and I understand that this can get kind of semantic, but that rights can be a construct. Fine, but do you believe then in a fundamental ethical that for interpersonal relationship?
Wait, the last thing you just said kind of cut off a little bit. Can you say that again?
Do you believe in a universal moral standard or ethical construct for relationship?
I can answer that. Can you talk a little bit more though, so I understand what you mean when you say that?
Right. So, as I suggest again, with libertarianism being an ethical philosophy rather than a political philosophy, you own
Wait, wait, wait,
yourself.
wait. Is there? I don't know if there's like a threshold you can set for the microphone, or be a little bit closer. Sometimes it cuts out. I don't know why.
Uh, yeah, I don't think it's a problem on my end. It's just the headset. It's
Okay,
never
wait.
been.
Is it just my end, or is it cutting out for you too? Oh, okay, just so that I don't miss the sentences. Maybe just a little bit
Hmm.
closer to the mic. But okay, yeah. Sorry. Go again.
All right, maybe if I just hunch over like this and my mouth is a little bit closer to my Bluetooth, is that better?
Yeah, it
Sounds like
sounds really good right now. Yeah.
it's on now.
Mhm.
Cool. So the hunch over solving to technical difficulties issues is, yes, I like this. Keeping it simple. No, but the idea that the libertarian philosophy is based on a universal ethical standard, based on you own yourself.
Mhm.
And when you talk about maximizing human happiness, I don't want to look at policies and say, well, I'm going to tinker with this or tinker with that, or I'm going to be a better central planner, or I'm going to make decisions for other people based on their happiness. I'm going to look at fundamental ethical principles. And when you look at what maximizes happiness in an individual relationship between two people or in just any group of people, you always look at what is the detriment to that happiness in most cases. And of course, you can say that want is a detriment, and this is, we can get into, the concept of positive and negative rights if you want to, try to parse that out if that's relevant. But that the dictum, the absolute standard for what maximizes a relationship between individuals is that there's no violence, there's no coercion. And anytime you have a relationship that's not voluntary, there's a winner and there's a loser, right? Someone is being subjected to force. Someone's individual will is being subverted. And what I want to see is a world of nothing but win-win relationship. And this isn't to say, and one of the ways that libertarianism as a political philosophy has been mispresented is that it's government this, government that. And so I would use the example of, a lot of people think of libertarianism as pro-gun, and in the sense that it absolutely is. But at a deeper level, it's pro-private property. You have a right to own whatever property you want on your own land. If you're not hurting anybody else, you can have metal in any shape you want. If you're not threatening anybody else, no one has a right to interfere with that. Similarly, I have a right on my property to say, no guns allowed on my land. And if you bring a gun onto my land, then you're violating my right as that property owner. And if a bunch of people want to form a community where they say guns aren't allowed and they come together voluntarily and they don't force that on anybody else, they have that right. So it's not that government can or shouldn't this, but you can have as much government as you want as long as it's voluntary. And this is where, if you define government as a coercive monopoly, as I do, that's how I use the word, then it's fundamentally unethical. It's holding us back from that potential ideal of harmony in ethical society. If you we're going to transform into something voluntary, say, well, that wouldn't really be a government, but if you want to call that a government.
Yeah, so I kind of want to test one of your ideas here. So you told me that like securing the rights of people, that resides in like a fundamental moral area for you. That's like fundamentally kind of what you're building off of. Is that?
Well, just to be precise with the language, I wouldn't say securing, because securing suggests a proactive service, respecting the natural state of rights that an individual consciousness in its own body has self-ownership.
Okay, so respecting other people's rights, not necessarily with some third party, but just respecting other people's rights, that's the fundamental moral thing that you're trying to get at, right?
Right. There's that universal standard of ethics that would suggest a non-violent society.
Sure. Okay. So fundamentally, this is where I disagree. So I just want to ask a couple of questions, and then we can kind of see if we agree or disagree on this. So if I were to posit two worlds, and I were to say that in one world, everybody's rights are respected, everybody adheres to the non-aggression principle, they all have their private property, they don't interact with one another. Let's say that in this world, you do have upticks in things like crime or disease, or other warring factions can come in and kill groups of people or whatever. And then in another world, it's entirely centrally planned. So the amount of freedom that you have is severely restricted, but you don't have these same like epidemics of crime or disease or other people coming in and killing your people. Which of these two worlds do you prefer, and why?
Right. Well, it's funny because I have a similar thought exercise that I take in a different way, which is, would you rather live in a world where government is huge but peaceful and runs half the economy, but only exerts enough coercion to maintain those monopolies and more or less provides what the market would? Or would you rather live in a government or under a government that's tiny but murders 1% of the population at random? And the question is, how do you measure the evil of a government, and how much does it take us off of our natural state of harmony? So you can look at those kinds of outcomes as you put forth. I understand that your question there is getting at a slightly different angle in terms of the outcome. And
Well, yeah.
certainly,
So on my, just to be clear on my question, I'm just trying to figure out, because you said that fundamentally what you're worried about is like this natural state of harmony or people's rights, and what I'm trying to push you on that to see if that's really what you care about, because because it seems to me that if you had a fundamental claim here, if you fundamentally cared about people's rights, that you'd be okay with it even if they let people into like dying or something, right? If more people died or more people were subject to crime. But if you say, well, in that case I don't think I would care, then that means there's something more fundamental that we need to get at. That's what I'm curious
right, no, okay, I see where you're going. Very good question. Give me a second. I haven't really considered it from that angle, but I have a couple ways I want to go about this.
Yeah, sure.
And one of them is defining crime, right? And this is where you're saying that if it's done by government, it's inherently not crime, and I would disagree. And I think you would agree. You have to have the same objective analysis of government. You can't give government a pass and say, well, just because a group of people call themselves the government, it's okay for them to murder or steal. And when it comes down to it, taxation, that's either government owns you, or when it threatens you with force or forcefully taking your stuff away if you don't pay taxes. That means that they are using violence against you in order to take your stuff. That's a form of theft. So if you live under a government that's doing that all the time, that's taking 50% of your income, as it is today for the average American, if you add up all the fees, fines, and hidden costs of government, the average American is working for government half the year. And that's a form of theft. That's a great crime. If you look at all the crimes committed by the U.S. military, by the police state, every time the police
Also,
fire,
like,
right?
just to kind of move through these one at a time, I'm not sure if I would agree that the average American pays 50% of their money to taxes to the government. That seems kind of excessive.
No. It's if you add up, if you add, it's not in direct taxes, but if you go like when in the cost of goods, in the cost of banking, and the inflation tax, when you add up everything, I understand the payroll tax, direct taxes, and sales taxes are significantly less than that. But when you add up all the compounds, all the compounded different taxes that you pay, and all the processes that go into providing consumer goods for the average American, average working American, it adds up to about.
Okay, I think I would challenge a lot of the math used to get there, but I guess it's kind of a different conversation. I will take issue with this idea that like taxation is a form of theft. I think it's pretty rare that people take things from you and then leave you something in exchange for them. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. And that also,
Well, if
like,
you don't have choice, it don't matter if you leave stuff for someone. If I mean, the mafia provides protection for people that are subject to its protection services. They give something back, but if it's not what you want, you don't have a choice. It's still a form.
I mean, I guess, but we have a choice in terms of like who our leaders are. Like we vote on these people democratically, and that's kind of the agreement that we make as a state of people to live together and do that, right? To vote on our
Well,
leaders to get them.
but if you're in the minority in an election and you vote against something, it's still on you. You don't have if you don't have a right to opt out. It's being on you.
Well, you do have a right to opt out, right? You can leave if you really don't want to be here, right? If you want to opt out of the state, you can leave.
You can't be free on your own land in the United States. You can't say my right to do business without being subjected to theft is being respected. I'd rather
Well, if
see
you
that.
wanted to be free in the United States, wouldn't you be disrespecting the non-aggression principle because you would have to capture land back that's already federally owned? Wouldn't you have to be stealing that back from the United States?
Well, no, I bought land for one. You can actually buy land still, but the government's claims to land are not legitimate. And actually, this might get to a more fundamental question if you want to go this way with it. That if you say that the government has some special ownership rights over people because it claimed this territory, what is a legitimate claim to owning land? And this is where I would believe in the principle of homesteading. You can't just put up a fence around 1,000,000 acres and say, well, because I say so, that's all mine. I mean, that's
Well,
king's.
I asked what, so just so real quick, just to get through some of these, to hammer this. So you said that you bought land. Just because you buy land doesn't mean that you own it as like an autonomous state, right? So like I own land in the United States, but I still have to pay property taxes on it because I recognize that like it still falls under the authority of the United States government. And then in
Right.
terms of like what is a legitimate claim to owning land, I mean, you said that you are very much a big believer in like private property rights. So I mean, if you wanted to throw up a big a big fence around 1,000,000 acres, I mean, as long as it's your property, I'd imagine you would say you'd have the right to do so, no?
No. There's a certain reasonable standard of what qualifies as homesteading because part of the standard that's expected here is that every human being on Earth has a right to equitable access to natural resources. If this is why like I got 10 acres, and I feel that that's a reasonable amount that I can say I've fenced in, I'm using it, I'm building on it, I'm developing it. It's a reasonable space for a single family homestead. If I were to put up like I said, a fence around 1,000,000 acres, that would not be a legitimate claim to that property because I couldn't make a reasonable case that I was actually using it. That's why.
How would you like homestead things out for like if you what about when we talk about like natural resources like fossil fuels, or how would we set up like a city where nobody is allowed to theoretically interact with another person's private property if they don't give consent to it? Like what if I just bought like the like New York like Times Central or whatever, and I'm like I don't want anybody to come here anymore? Like how do we deal with things like roads and whatnot?
Well, where I live, we have a system of setbacks and easements, and I mean, it's not that hard to imagine. I mean, a lot of people. It's funny you go straight to the roads because a lot of people who aren't libertarian ask, almost facetiously, but without government, who's going to build the roads? And of course, I know you're not asking the question that way, but at a deeper level, it's really about how do we manage shared property use. And I think when we have a system that's based on respect for individual rights, it's based on non-coercion, it's based on non-violence and cooperation rather than a single coercive monopoly, then we're going to have a better system. And there are already ways that we do. And in most examples, we have cooperative systems. people are happier than when we have a coercive, centrally planned system that is obviously corruptible and inherently tramples individual rights at some level.
Well, let's say you have like a city that's growing and everybody has their individual homesteads, and there's like one guy that's holding out in the middle, and he doesn't want to give an easement with anybody, and it disrupts the entire flow of this entire city. Like, how would you deal with somebody like that? Or what if like 3 or 4 property owners got together and they said no trespassing between all of our properties, and it ends up blocking off access to like an entire part of a city or something? How would you do that?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. That's not much of a hypothetical. It's a real situation that we face today in a lot of cases. I just read this. I think it's a diner in, is it Austin? I think it's Austin, where there's a diner downtown, and it's like some 50s, 60s, like really cool structure. And
Hmm.
the guy was going to sell it to a developer who was going to build it out as a multi-use building with retail underneath. And no, Denver. I'm sorry, it was in Denver.
Okay.
And if anybody wants to check on this, this was in the news. This was on Drudge Report this morning, actually. And the developer wanted to buy out the property and put in this big multi-use structure. And it was the historical society that actually came in and said, no, you can't do that. We want your building that you own to be designated as an historical monument so that it can't be developed. So in this case, it's a collective that's being used in the opposite sense of what you as opposing development but still interfering with property rights. So if the people want to keep that building there, if they want to for historical purposes, but they don't own it, the right of ownership still needs to be respected. How do they achieve that goal? Well, they have to offer the owner more than more money or a better deal in whatever way than what this developer is paying. So now we talk about the challenge in terms of developing the city when you have for your vision when you want to develop the city. And in that case, you don't have a right to bulldoze someone's home because you want to put a city around it. And if you can't get them to budge, then that's tough, tough city. Like you can't just violate that guy's ownership or that family and say, no, your home can't be here anymore. But
So I'm kind of
hold on,
curious.
let me just one last
Okay.
point. But if you want to develop that city however you want, and you want to start fresh, and you want to bring a bunch of people together, you want to homestead new land, and this is one of the things where government is pulling the way today and preventing you. I want you to have that right to be able to settle that and create your own community from scratch, whatever standards you want.
Okay, so backing up, let's say that I get into a thing where, let's say that I'm very wealthy for whatever reason, and I go into cities and I just start buying out land in the middle and then saying I don't want anybody to go on it, and I try to destroy cities that way. What would keep me from doing something like that?
Well, you say destroy a city, it would be just purchasing and doing something else that you want with it. If the you have an economic system now, when you say that in today's world under government, which creates huge unnatural concentrations of wealth and power, that is a real hypothetical problem because you do have, I don't know, things like Epstein's Island, right, where a guy who without a government managed economy, without the opportunities that come from corporatism and all the other things, probably wouldn't have the kind of money that he does, is able to do something like that. And you have a world where the economy is based around the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency and the petrodollar and the Federal Reserve System that creates all sorts of unnatural concentration of wealth and power and freak things like that. But if you had a state where those didn't exist, and I know that that's a long process to work towards, that fear of just some rich asshole coming in and doing something weird like that would take something very valuable and destroy it would be a lot less likely. But in the hypothetical event that happens, whatever resources there are there, whatever demand there is from people, I mean, they would destroy that city. Well, if there's a community there, if there's a people there who want that city to exist, maybe they don't get to use that exact land or those exact buildings, but they can create, they can rebuild, they can, whatever got that city to be there in the first place can be done again. And without that uh, economic imbalance, probably be done in a way that would better people. I mean, I'd
Well,
like
like
to
let's say
see.
for instance, like if I were to look at a place like San Francisco, let's say that I stepped in and I started like buying like say like I bought like the Golden Gate Bridge and then I said I'm going to put a house in the middle here and I don't want people to travel anymore. Or I moved over
Right.
and I bought like the bridge that goes over to Oakland or whatever and I bought that. Or are you just going to wait for hopefully some private owner to just build a whole other bridge and maybe let other people use it, or like how do you resolve
No,
something?
yeah. So that's an interesting challenge, but I don't think it's a very realistic one, and I get that it's a hypothetical possibility. But right now, you couldn't buy the Golden Gate Bridge because, and forgive my ignorance, even having been born in San Francisco, I don't know who actually owns the Golden Gate Bridge. I don't know if it's the city of San Francisco or the state or the county or some other governmental organization. Excuse me, but one of the things that they do in doing so is legitimately decentralize the ownership control of that large the communal resource that is the Golden Gate Bridge. And in and of itself, that is a legitimate function that government is serving that I support. And as we were to localize government, simply that control would become localized. And if it were to eventually completely privatized, it would be with a very distributed ownership, with a lot of shareholders, with a lot of individuals who would have an interest in it. And so it wouldn't be possible, or it would be highly unlikely for them to give it up to someone because it would have more value as that resource being communally owned or being of great public distributed ownership and being publicly available. Again, if like you said, with you're just gonna, some billionaire could buy out large portions of the city and prevent people from going there. It's destroying value. What is the incentive to destroy value? I don't think it's really there. And
I
if
mean,
anything,
the incentive would absolutely be there. Like, I think if I could do it out of spite, I could do it because I see the potential to make a lot of money. Like maybe I see a certain bridge and I want to buy every bridge and turn it into a massive toll bridge. Like, I think that people could absolutely do something like this. I think
right,
it's
yeah. So this is why that community, that distributed ownership is really important, because I think that would provide an adequate safeguard against that. Now, it's not foolproof, but I think that the system that you would have in that world where, where that's a risk is better than living in the world where we have all of the consequences and real
sure.
problems associated with central planning that we have
So
today.
you're essentially kind of talking about co-ops at this point, right?
Well, that a lot of what you raise as challenges about, the community living and common resources and, infrastructure would be, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's say that you have a city then where somebody buys the bridge, and let's say who even decides how to distribute ownership of that land? What kind of body do you have, or who is making the decision to say that, like, okay, well, this is something that we need to have like some kind of quasi public ownership in?
Right. Well, if this were to happen in the future, these things are being developed anew, then you would have whatever agreement brings the resources together from the people living in that area, from the people who are investing in that, from the people who have an interest, from the customers who are going to make that a valuable resource. As it is today, what I suggest, and I kept this out of my introduction, but I suppose this is my opportunity to speak in the shameless political plug that I am running for the Libertarian Party nomination for 2020 on the platform of dissolving the federal government. And regardless of your political orientation, this is something that is more likely to get you what you want when government is localized. And we take government through the federal government through a peaceful, orderly, responsible bankruptcy process that leaves us with 50 independent states, and of course, up to 562 finally, truly sovereign native nations. And so, what I suggest in this bigger process, to get back to it, okay, commercial over, back your challenge here, that localization would be how you would achieve that, and that as you get government down to the community level, there would be a process or a point at which everybody within an area would have an opportunity to claim, say, a share, or everybody who happens to be a citizen of the city would have one voting share in some of those communal resources.
What would happen if you were to get the people who have the shares of this bridge? What if somebody were to show up and start buying out their shares? And then somebody gets 51% of the shares of a bridge and decides to either shut it down or not allow people to cross it anymore.
It's possible, but again, in a market, the incentive is to create value, not to destroy value. So I mean, I would.
Well, maybe this guy could own a city to the south and he wants to see that city grow. Maybe he owns like a lot of like shares of land or businesses in that city. And maybe if he shuts down the Golden Gate Bridge, he'll get a whole bunch of people to move out of this city and then go into the other one where he owns successful businesses in.
Okay, so Destiny, I really appreciate like the general, like like how.
Wait. I'm sorry, real quick. Your mic keeps cutting off. I don't know if there's like an air conditioner or something in the background or like a fan, but it sounds like it sounds like sometimes there's like something in the background that.
I apologize for that.
Okay,
There
yeah.
might be noise from outside here. Uh, yeah, I'm hearing that background too when I'm not talking. So it's noise. But anyway, so I really like this, and I like going into debates with an attitude. We've generally gone geared off into, what if this, what about this, what about this, like all of these, well, Adam, but in your world, it's not going to be like this bad thing would happen. And at no point in asserting what I've asserted that nonviolence is better than violence in human relationships, that's going to make the world perfect, that in and of itself is going to solve every problem. And really the conversation could be going the other way, and that if you're advocating for state violence, you're advocating for a centrally planned or a central planning authority that as you say, that would by your vision of the greater good have the right to violate individual rights. I would say, well, what happens when wars get started? What happens when you have a police state? What happens when you have corporatism? What happens when you have runaway corruption of government?
Well, yeah, but like the difference is that like in the current system we have now, ideally, and I would say that in the American system, it seems to work this way. We have means of resolving these disputes. Like in your world, the only way to resolve these disputes is through force of arms. There is no arbitration in your world. That's
absolutely not true. That's a terrible false assumption. Because
well, but I mean, like, real quick, because like you say these are insane hypotheticals, but these are pretty basic questions about how would you resolve a dispute between ownership of like social goods or whatever. These have all been like pretty basic questions, and it seems like without some type of central body that everybody has agreed to invest power into, there's a million ways that this type of stuff could get absolutely destroyed. And the argument here that like, well, people always want to create wealth and create value. They only want to do that in a local sense. Like generally, if we believe, in the invisible hand and Adam Smith and everything, people are generally only incentivized to create wealth for themselves. And if they can do it while destroying wealth for other people, I mean, even in our current capitalist system, we see people do that. For instance, with patent trolling, where people will invest large amounts of monies to destroy other businesses.
Possible with government. Again, a patent is a government.
Sure. So with the patent itself, it is. But I'm saying that in your yeah, I understand that, but in your world, I could troll so much harder. I could literally buy access to rivers and then close those ports down and say like, sorry, I own this now. You guys aren't getting any more water unless you either pay an exorbitant price or you move out and go somewhere else. Like this, I don't see how you would avoid these abuses in your world when you have and we haven't even gotten to the bigger problem. You said you want to make 50 autonomous states. Well, what if, say, Mexico or Canada was like, oh, cool, well, we're just going to roll in and maybe take over Texas or maybe take over, like North Dakota because you guys aren't going to be able to effectively defend yourself. Like, how would any of this work?
Yeah, so, okay, I'm glad you raised that issue because, the anti-militarism aspect, having seen the greatest evils that government can commit and actually been a part of that myself, the founders of this country were distinctly against what they call a standing army, what we would call a military today, and what they favored was militia defense. They knew that a military was ripe for abuse. And behind your question there, I think, and this is what it was for me at least, as I was figuring out this issue, is this very big lie that we are taught from a young age in the United States especially, that wars are fought between countries. That it was, you say, what if Mexico wants to do this, come into this state, or whatever. We're taught in elementary school, the first time we're taught about history and government schools in the U.S., that it was United States versus Germany versus Japan versus China, and that wars are fought between countries, and nothing could be further from the truth. And when you just understand what a government is, territorial monopoly on violence, that wars are not fought between countries. They are conducted by governments using violence to expand protection. And when you tell your government, yes, please rule me, govern me, bend me over, and take half my income, that's what makes you a juicy target for another government that would come in and govern you. And the ultimate defense, as the founders knew, was a well-armed population that refuses to be governed by anyone. And as Gandhi proved, the well-armed part is really optional, and that non-violent resistance is more effective.
Well, but I mean, like you said, So
violent.
I don't know where you deployed to, but like this doesn't work. Like ISIS is a collective body that was very well armed, that got a lot of funding from outside states and was able to collectively arm itself. Absolutely rolled through and destroyed villages of like Kurdish people that are armed. I don't think having like individuals that have guns is going to stand up to some sort of like governing body that is organized that can roll through and destroy everything about you. Like
Right. Well, where did all that money and arms come from? A lot of it was U.S. or other government sources. It didn't rise up organically. It wasn't
well,
a
but
primary.
that
The
doesn't
government,
matter though. If you're in a non-organized area, like if you have like a bunch of
right.
people that are libertarians, you can't
Well,
tell everybody else to do it.
I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't be organized. I'm just saying that by whatever means you come together to be organized, if you compromise your principles, if you compromise ethics to achieve it, then you're going to be worse off than if you come together effectively in a voluntary means. You come together cooperatively, you're going to have a better defense. And if anything, having a military makes us less safe. And I don't just mean in terms of the wars that and this is really important to take the historical perspective here. Do you know Dr. Steven Pinker, Better Angels of Our Nature, The Surprising Decline in Violence?
I know of Pinker, but I haven't read any of his books now.
Okay, so yeah, so it's a great TED Talk, The Surprising Decline in Violence, and I disagree with some of his analyses and conclusions, but the one thing that he really demonstrates irrefutably is that human violence is on the decline. We're living in the peaceful times in human history. And not only that, but that it follows a kind of radioactive decay that is consistent throughout history. And of course, it's a jagged line, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but the clear historical trend of it coming down over time is very clear. And to me, I see it inherently connected to the nature of the progress of infinite life, that we get more peaceful over time, we get less violent. It gets more and more difficult to lie to us and get away with what governments used to need to do. Make force on force wars happen, where you could get, you know, thousands, millions of gullible young men who've never met each other meet in the middle of another field and commit murder because they're wearing different colors. And this idea in and of itself is just insane when you're able to understand it, and it's only possible in a world where government is able to dominate mechanisms of communication way.
Sure. My
And
understanding of Pinker, though, is that like Pinker literally argues that the state is necessary to enforce like the safety of its people. That like a lot of the literature that he writes about is how the states themselves have done a good job at decreasing the amount of violence that occurs in a population.
right, right, and this is where he conflates the ideas of government versus what humanity and society is capable of with technology, and where one of his conclusions is incorrect, although he is correct in pointing out that as an institution, the state does deserve a lot of credit for this decline in violence, and he credits a number of things for this, partly the conglomeration of states, the creation of larger states from smaller states, and the technology being applied in stopping crime. And in that sense, I don't dispute his account of history. But to say that it's necessary that for the future is an entirely different proposition. And in a world where we see decentralization more and more common, we see decentralized systems working better than centralized systems. It's not that government didn't have some role in getting us to this point, but that we can do better now, that we can see past reliance on these systems of violence. And it's true that if you don't know any better and that's the only way you have to get a job done, then sure, use the government, use the violence. But soon as you have a non-violent alternative, you'll see that that's a better option.
But I mean, I think that I this is really hard because you're kind of making like the socialist argument that like everything we've done has gotten us to this point really well, but now we're ready to like advance beyond something different. So socialists argue that like
Just
cooperatively.
continuing the same good things.
Well, no, because like when you say, for instance, like collectivization or like the collection of power within governments or whatever has made things worse. That's just not true. Like the integration, for instance, of the United States, the integration that exists within our 50 states has been one of our greatest powers.
Well, I didn't say that. Remember, I said that the measure of evil of government is how much it violently takes stuff off our natural state of harmony. That I'd rather live under a big peaceful government than a small violent.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would much rather live under a big peaceful government than a small violent one as well. I guess I feel like the good that we get out of our government like dramatically overrides the violence that the government uses to do things like collect taxes. I would say
Sure.
that's
So I'm not trying to I'm not making an argument of equivalence. that everything is completely bad or that there are no good things that come out of government. I'm just saying, look at how we come together as a society. Look at how we have progressed over time. This decline in violence is an elevation of ethics. That we have gotten more ethical over time. We have gotten more harmonious, more respectful of individual rights. That we have embraced the basic idea: don't hit, don't steal, don't kill, and that we've come to the point where we just make this little exception for government. Don't hit, don't steal, don't kill, unless you're a cop or a soldier or an IRS agent.
Well, to be clear, this is not directly equivalent, right? Like the reason why the government has the powers that it does to enact violence is because as a civilization, we have collectively given government those powers. That if the majority of people wanted to remove those powers from government, we could do it. We could just vote for people that were anti-statists or vote for people that were anti-police or whatever. But it seems like collectively we don't want that.
Well, you can't delegate a right that you don't have. Like, I don't have a right to say, I don't like what drugs you're doing, so I'm going to kidnap you and lock you in a box, you know? And I can't say, well, then I hired a cop to do that, therefore it's okay. It doesn't change the fundamental nature.
Well, but we do that all the time. What do you mean? When we do things like the war on drugs, we voted to lock people in prisons for the drugs that they do. How can you say we don't do that?
Right. So what I'm saying is that you're being a party to a crime. You're not delegating a right because you don't have that right as an individual.
So well, I mean, like you say, you're being I don't agree with this at all. If collectively, if we've agreed to enable the government to have a certain right, if we as a society has consented to it, then I mean, you can delegate that away. The same way that if somebody is into getting hit during sex, right? We wouldn't say that hitting somebody who likes it and has asked for it, oh, well, they've just delegated away a crime. Well, no, they've consented to that activity. The same way that as a society, we kind of consent to giving government the power to enact, violence to ensure that society functions in a certain way.
So you're saying that then that violence can be used against an individual who doesn't consent. So what you're doing is setting up a non-voluntary, you're setting up a coercive relationship. It's not like like you say, a sexual relationship where someone says, well, you have to pay for it and you can stop it at any time. Talking about coercive government, the status quo that you're arguing for that we have today is based on a really dangerous logical fallacy of appeal to authority based on if enough people say it's right, it's okay. And no matter how many people vote for something, no matter how many people consent to something, it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it good for everybody. People can be wrong, they can be fooled, they can be unethical, and they can be in collective unethical activity. I mean, if a bunch of people vote to murder you, that doesn't just make it okay to murder you all of a sudden.
I mean, it really depends on exactly what we're talking about. For if enough people say something is right, it's okay. Like I said, there's a fundamental difference between somebody breaking into your house and stealing $30 versus as a society that we all live in and participate in and reap the rewards of. For if people vote to raise taxes, I don't think that's the same type of theft.
Right. Exactly. No, but you're saying that. So if I go to your house today and say I don't like that you're drinking alcohol, I'm going to point a gun in your face. I'm going to demand that you get down on the floor, put your hands behind your back. I'm going to cuff you, and I'm going to lock you in a prison cell somewhere. That's wrong. I can't do that, right? You would agree. I'm just kidnapping you. That's then I'm assaulting you. But you're saying that magically that becomes okay. That becomes an ethical. If not vote on it, and I go through a training class, and I become a police officer, and city government passes a law that says this is a dry town. Now it's okay. Now it's ethical. Now I can do it. So
What you just described is of course. That if somebody as an individual were to do that, then it would be absolutely wrong. But if some agent of the state, and the state is democratically elected by a body of people that vote people inside, and then that state collectively, enacts some law and passes it through legislation with democratically voted people, that the state would have the authority to send people in and do that because that's what those people have voted on. Now, we can argue whether or not that's a good or bad policy, but to say that that's the same as a random person breaking into your house and doing it, no, these are totally different. There's nothing fallacious about recognizing the difference between a centrally consented to governing body enacting, violence against citizens that have all been voted on it versus like an individual doing it in a renegade fashion. These are two totally different things.
Right. So I'm kind of surprised it took us this long to get to the crux, perhaps, of our distinction here. Is that you think it's okay to vote away individual rights? That individual rights are subject to collective negotiation, and I would say that's not true. That individual rights are based on universal ethical standards, and anytime you violate that ethical standard, you take humanity down from its potential. That we are stronger as a society. We are happier even in every way when we have nonviolent and non-coercive relationships, and we have a standard of ethics that you can rely on in society, and you can go about knowing that your neighbors are going to respect that you're not going to have a shift who, well, we don't like people who have brown hair, and now everybody who has brown hair is, going to get rounded up and put in a camp or something like that, or whatever other, silly
Well, but
arbitrary.
in your area, that could happen a lot easier, right? Like, let's say, for instance, a bunch of individual property owners come together in a state, and they all decide that they don't want to serve brown people anymore. In your country, they could do that.
Well, no, because really, in order for, I mean, okay, now, so you're conflating things a little bit to bring in racism and discrimination.
Wait. Can I wait? Let me just say this real quick, okay? Because you keep saying that I'm like conflating things using impossible hypotheticals. So you just said that in your area you can protect the rights of certain people, okay? But I claim that the government actually exists because that's what ensures the rights of people. That rights don't mean anything in a vacuum without somebody else supporting those rights. So the example that I gave, the hypothetical I gave was, I can illustrate that in your system, in a very easy way, rights could be violated. And the example that I give is, let's say a collection of people come together and say, hey, let's not serve brown people in our businesses, and we'll all give each other preferential treatment as long as we do that. Now you have to answer, how does your society account for that? Or you have to concede, okay, well, in my society, brown people can be violated as well. That's not like a crazy hypothetical. I'm not sidestepping or conflating. It's a very, very, very simple challenge.
It is a little changing the point, and if you, I'm happy to address that as well. Because what you're saying is that, well, this kind of gets down to what is the definition of government, and as we have it today, government is a territorial monopoly on the force that exists in a fundamentally criminal, unethical way. Is based on violating individual rights. And your question is basically, Adam, in your ideal world, isn't it possible that somebody's rights could get violated? And I would say yes. But in your world, it's a guarantee that people.
Yeah, but the difference is that in my world, we have a check and balance on it. We have a Supreme Court. We've got three branches of government. Like we have civil.
They're not. See, that's one of the greatest mythologies of government. Oh, just give us this power because there's some checks and balances on it, and you can vote us out if you don't like it. Where in a market-based society, in a voluntary society, you have the immediate check and balances available of disassociation and taking your business elsewhere. I'd rather live in a world where if you fuck up, you face consequences immediately rather than, well, maybe you'll get paid leave if.
No, like the problem is your analysis. No. This analysis is incredible.
Representing in government, it provides less of a check on that power. I want the best check on that power possible.
The analysis that you're giving is incredibly naive. I'm not saying that like one business would just say no browns here and now people are going to take their business elsewhere. Clearly that doesn't work, because if that did work, then we would have never had racism in any part of the world ever, because people would have just, like, oh, well, I'm going to lose money if I don't do this. There are cultural pressures. There are businesses that can give each other perks or favors. Like, hey, I'm a business, for instance, that maybe I farm corn on my thing. I'm not going to sell to you if you sell to brown people. It would be incredibly easy to conceive of a small collection of people that could pressure business owners into not serving brown people.
Right.
You would have no central authority or body by which to override these people's economic incentives to bend the knee basically to a handful of racists.
Right. And if you look at the world with the government we have today, you can look at you don't have to use any imagination to see the racism of the war on drugs. This is the current reality that we have, where because you have a system that violates individual rights, because you have a system that protects people who violate individual rights, racism is exacerbated. So racism and so many of these other things that you point to potential problems are really based more on the collective paradigm. You can have racism with and without government, right? I mean, we've seen horrifically racist governments throughout history, obviously. In fact, really the greatest widespread crimes of violence in the name of racism have been done by governments, or rather by people in the name of government.
Yeah, except if you believe in any sort of individual, universal, ethical standard stuff, which I don't even believe in, but if you believe in that, government has helped us make more moral progress today than we ever had in the past. Black people aren't slaves anymore. We have, civil rights in the country. If you're discriminated against, you can appeal to a central body to get these issues looked at. I mean, this idea that like, we're not in a worse place morally now than we were, 100 years ago. It seems like we're making progress, and the government is only getting larger and larger. So,
agree. Well, I agree that we're making progress. I agree that government is getting bigger in terms of having more economic control over our lives, but in terms of being able to violently interfere with their lives, it's actually less powerful. We have a greater assertion of civil liberties. That's basically a check on government power saying stop violating those individual rights. As you know, to bring back to the issue of police, something that I'm actually directly working on now, pushing back against the shall issue ID laws in the state of Louisiana with that case, and that's what it takes is people seeing those opportunities to when standing up and fighting back is worthwhile and saying no, government, you can't do this unethical thing. And I know you know that there is these patterns. Today the greatest rights violators in the world are government.
Well, you're begging every time. So you've said this statement over and over again, but you're begging the question every time you say it. That's kind of what the debate is about. You can't keep begging the question with that statement. You can't keep saying like the greatest violator of rights is governments when we're arguing about whether or not the existence of a government necessarily violates your rights, right? Because obviously I don't agree with that assertion every time.
So maybe it would be better to get down to this fundamental thing of ethics. You don't believe in any system of ethics. You don't have a concept of right and wrong.
No, of course not. Not like objectively. I mean, I could ask you, do you?
Yes, that's what I mean. That's what the entire premise is that you own yourself, and that this is.
Okay, can you tell me where you can point to that? Where does that moral fact exist in the world that you own yourself?
It's the reality of existence being an independent consciousness in your own physical organic body.
Okay, how can I point to ownership? How can I see that? What does that look like?
Because ownership is absolute true control by nature, right? So the very fact of you saying that is an assertion of ownership.
Well, no, ownership is a concept that's made by humans. For instance, does a tree own the land that it's on? Does a rock own the land that it sits on? Like ownership this is entirely human constructed. This isn't something that's found in the natural world. This is something that we think up in our minds. So I don't understand how you can say there's some objective moral standard that you're pointing to when not really. These are just like some ethical things that you've decided sound good, which is great. I mean, they sound good to me for the most part. They're not the most important things to me, but I agree with them. But we can't pretend that we're recognizing these as some objective fact and that the government existing is like, impeding our progress towards these objective facts. Like, I don't think this is a good statement to make.
Okay, so you can criticize any idea that could be described as abstract and say that's just a construct. That's fine. But what we're looking for is how to maximize human happiness, as you said, and this is where I think we're coming from. In a sense, the same starting point, right? How do we maximize human happiness? How do we create the best experience for everybody on earth? How do we do that? And what fundamental rules do we look at that could guide us, that could dictate our behavior, that could provide some standard of how to interact with other people to maximize human happiness? And if you look at what it means to be a human being, to be, again, an independent consciousness in your own body, you control your thoughts, you control your mind, you control your body. And if we take that as a fact of reality, and yes, you can say it's a construct, you don't really exist, you're just a pile of molecules. Sure, okay, but if we're going to accept human beings exist, we're going to accept the basic concept, you're a human being, you think, therefore you are, you have an independent consciousness, you have your own mind and body that you have a right to, that you own, that this gives us a standard of ethics, and that this presents something that I want respected in myself, and I want to see a world where this is respected. I don't want to see a world where people of your line of thinking, but without your open-mindedness and intelligence and compassion, the people who have that same lack of ethical grounding, or the psychopaths that run government, to be able to say, no, ethics doesn't matter, let's just go with this practical thing. That's how we get populism. That's how we get all the disastrous unintended consequences.
Sure, but in your world, your individual tribes would be much more subjective to like harsher governments anyway, because they could just roll through and take you over, right?
No, because again, this is where I think, again, Steven Pinker's work is so important, showing how
Pinker you're citing, though, is massively in favor of the state. I don't know how you could cite him and think that that's helping your argument. Like, he's massive.
Right, because because I'm his irrefutable observations that he says this is what I'm observing, this is the data, these are the statistics.
Yeah, but I don't know if it would be good to try to cherry pick some of Pinker's findings when his overall conclusion is like massively divergent from your own. It's almost a 180. Like,
no, because he admits in his own work that his conclusion in that sense is and I think it's really important that we can look at the discoveries of people who disagree with us and say, well, they did this thing that's really important. They figured this thing out that's really important. they might be wrong about this, but the work of Pinker in the academic historical sense of going through and showing decline in violence is absolutely critical and really underreported work that deserves greater examination. And I would, if anything, refer you to the work of Walter Block, a professor at Loyola University, who's done a really great analysis of this that I think is really insightful, where he takes a sort of third look at what Pinker again is showing us, this decline in violence, and saying that if you incorporate state violence in a way that Pinker didn't, that violence is actually on the increase, because as government has gone up, the amount of our lives that are ruled by coercion has gone up incredibly.
Okay.
Enforcement.
All right. Do we want to? Is it like? Do we do questions and answers?
so yeah, no, I mean that got Jesse. That was fun. Like I was like, man, we went like really intense, and I don't know, felt like there wasn't a lot of. I'm glad that we felt comfortable like interrupting each other, but yeah, not a lot of fun back and forth and veering off and more random that would make this entertaining. Maybe we should get some questions.
Yeah.
Excellent. I really enjoyed it. I think the audience did as well, and we're excited to jump into these questions. By the way, anybody, if you have questions, forgot to mention at the start, if you want to put just an @ModernDayDebate, depending on how much time we have, we might get to them. And if you put @ModernDayDebate in the live chat, I will scoop those questions up, put them in the list, and we'll try to get through them. Also, 100% of super chats will go to the Breast Cancer Research Foundation today. So if you want to send in a super chat, know that all of it will go to research for breast cancer. And if you, anybody, if this is your first time to the channel and you're like, you really actually donate it, let us know. Shoot me an email at moderndaydebate at Gmail, and I'll send you the receipt. I usually send it to the debaters afterwards for record keeping, but I'll send it to anybody. So with that, thanks for your super chat, Movie Theory, who said, thanks for hosting this. This is awesome. Thanks. That means a lot. Steven Steen, thanks for your super chat. He said, oh gosh, I bet cops are excited to stop and frisk James. That's really sick, but thanks, Steven. I appreciate that. He's a regular. Steven Steen, thanks for your other super chat. He said, this is an excellent discussion. Pip, pip, Cheerios. I don't know what that means, but I'm glad you enjoyed it, Steven. This has honestly been a true joy for me as well. Damien, let's see. Ronan Kanushi, thanks for your question. He said, ask Adam if he believes in women's rights, such as abortion. If he says no, he's not a full-fledged libertarian. It's a challenge for you, Adam.
Well, actually, I have a better response to that. If you don't think you're the only real libertarian, you're not a real libertarian. So, yes, I absolutely do believe in women's rights when I talk about rights. I'm actually... I say vegan-ish because I'm not particularly strict about it, but I believe that the rights that we talk about are really universal to consciousness, and so I absolutely believe in women's rights as much as men's rights, and the rights inherent with self-ownership. And when it comes to abortion, the whole, because I know that, let me just grab this third rail with both hands. I have the opportunity to avoid it with this, but no, when it comes to abortion, the challenge of pro-life, pro-choice is really an unfortunate way of polarizing it. And I think there's a way of addressing the fact that a child or an unborn child is an independent life and owns itself, and a mother owns herself and still has the right incumbent with ownership of her body, and that the government should have nothing to say about.
You got it. Thanks so much for that question and for your response, Adam. And then Volklex and Weirdon, if I'm pronouncing these right, thanks for subscribing. Glad to have you here. Saw that during the stream. And then next, Tyler Durden, thanks for your question. He said, for both, does private property violate the NAP? He said, private property carries an implied threat of violence if another person refuses to recognize your ownership and tries to use it.
You want to go first?
Well, I mean, I don't really believe in the NAP, so I don't know how I could answer. I mean, I don't know if private. I mean, I imagine that your response would be something like, everybody has a right to some private property, and it's like an extension of your own autonomy. So of course, your own autonomy isn't violated by exercising it over some private land. Would be my guess, but.
Right. The only thing I'd really add to that is an important understanding of what this comes down to in terms of dispute resolution is something I got from a friend of mine, Mike Nelson, who's an Army Special Forces veteran who's blind as a result of his service in Afghanistan and other experiences he had in the military medically with that. And he really just has a beautiful attitude about this that, you know, if someone comes and steals your stuff and you go, hey, why are you stealing my stuff? You know, I might assume that you really want it. If you're breaking into, you know, food stores to survive, to live, you know, I want you to be able to do that. And it really comes down to, you know, what's worth defending. In a sense, you have a right, you have a claim to defend it, but the better approach, again, respecting not the non-aggression principle, but the idea of maximizing value and nonviolence is that, you know, you're only going to go after something if it creates more value, right? So if you know, if someone, if kids break into my backyard and, you know, because they were starving and they stole some food, you know, I'm not going to go shoot them. You know, that's a ridiculous disproportionate use of force. So in and of itself, the ownership of private property doesn't say I threat violence or have the threat of violence. It's really just a claim to ownership.
You got it. Thanks so much. Next up, we have Walter White. Thanks for your question. He said, what do you think of the left libertarians called anarchists who see all the kind of problems that you brought up today with private property and therefore want to get rid of it?
Again, I want to let Destiny go first.
Well, I mean, I'm not a. I think all of these are crazy. I'm not a libertarian or an anarchist. So, I mean, I think that all of these. I don't believe in any of these rights or whatever at some fundamental level. My fundamental thing is to maximize happiness for human people, and I think that when we come together collectively and we organize under a government, that we can ensure that more people have access to things that make them happy. That's my basis for it. So, I mean. Yeah, so I don't know how I would answer an anarcho-communist's challenge to a libertarian. That's not a question for me.
Well said. Yeah, that's the anarcho-communist challenge to a libertarian. And some people would say that I'm an anarchist if you define government as a violent institution. I say you can't have violent institutions, and some people would say, well, government can be non-coercive. Government can be respectful of the non-aggression principle. In which case, well, I'm not an anarchist. So again, it's just the ethical part of this that comes to me first. And when those who describe themselves as anarcho-communists or socialists, or I don't really like the term left libertarian. I don't libertarian adjectives attached to it, but fair enough. That if you don't have the right to own property as an extension of yourself, you don't have a right to the natural resources. An individual human being on this planet, then
you got it. Thanks so much. And I want to also mention to everybody, I'm going to also, in addition to the YouTube links for both Adam and Destiny, I'm going to put Destiny's Twitch link down in the description, and then also Adam's KokeshForPresident.com link down in the description, so you can check out those as well. So those are going in just a second during the stream. And TrueGamer69, thanks for your question. He said, if I may ask, and they don't mind answering, who are you thinking about voting for this election season?
Well, I would be voting for myself, but as a convicted felon for civil disobedience in my home state of Arizona, I am eligible to run for president, but I am not eligible to vote for myself. But for people who do want to support dissolving the federal government, and you know, this is a really fun debate, but it's totally off. You know, what I would, if my campaign manager was watching this, he'd be like, Adam, get back on message. Just talk about localization. But for me, again, localizing government, getting it down to the community level, no matter what your vision of government is, gets us more in line with our desires, our needs. You know, everybody gets what they want. If you're a liberal or conservative, you don't have to see the other as an enemy. When you can say, I respect you living like that over there, and I respect you living like that over there. And I think we have a great crop of libertarian candidates already now. I would encourage everybody to check out lp.org and look up some of the libertarian debates. There's some other great candidates who want to bring the standard of ethics to politics. And if I may take this as an opportunity just to get the back, I, I know that you have a very well thought out worldview. I know that you have a good understanding of government, and you have a very good understanding of different political philosophies and political equations. And as you said at the beginning, you're starting from the perspective of how do we maximize human happiness. I would say, like, you've got to look for these. All right, sorry for that sidebar. I want to hear.
Wait, your last thing cut out. You've got to look to the what?
You've got to look for universal rules. You've got to look for principles.
Oh yeah, I absolutely do. So my background in like ethics or philosophy is much better than my background in political philosophy. I don't actually know much political philosophy at all. But everything that I'm talking about has a foundation in like ethics and not as much in like political philosophy, of course.
I would just say this is ethics applied to politics. But Desmond, who are you looking to support in 2020?
At this point, honestly, it's probably gonna be Biden. It's probably what I'm looking at.
You don't sound very happy about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I would have wanted somebody farther to the left to get there, but like the policies of some of the more left-leaning people are kind of stupid, and I don't know how far Warren is going to make it. I think like Warren is probably the one that I'm looking at right now, in terms of like my ideal candidate. But I'm not sure.
You just don't think so? Is this like you'd prefer someone of like if you could write your own platform, it would be closest to Warren, but strategically you're thinking of supporting Biden because you're more likely to get Biden to defeat Trump?
Well, Biden is almost positively going to win the nomination, so that's why I have to support Biden. In terms of who I would really want in office, it would probably be somebody significantly more left than Biden because I want to kind of move things back in that direction. I think we've moved like pretty far off to the right in the United States right now. So when we're having questions of whether or not we should even have universal health care, like that's a pretty scary place to be in, I think, for the United States. So I would prefer somebody farther to the left, but I don't necessarily like their policies. So somebody like a Bernie Sanders.
What state are you in?
Right now I'm in California.
So I'm a big supporter of, what's funny, I'm in California too.
Yeah, I live in LA. I think you said you did, yeah.
Oh, well, hey, maybe we can hang out this weekend.
Maybe.
So the Cal Exit, the California independence movement, support California being independent from the rest of the country. If you could have, a government more in line with your values, but you give up the opportunity to force your standards on Texas.
Nope. I'm a huge globalist. I think that the more integrated the world becomes, I think the better the world becomes for everybody. The less problems other people have to deal with, the less problems that I have to deal with. If the Middle East was a strong, stable, autonomous region or a linked region with other people, then I wouldn't have to worry about me sending soldiers from my country to go and die over there. Like I'm very much bought into like a globalist framework for the world.
That doesn't justify sending to the Middle East. So would you support the United States taking over Canada and Mexico to start this globalization?
Well, no, we become globalized through trade. I don't think we become globalized through imperialism. I mean, we have in the past, but I mean, I would hope now that it would be through like multinational trade agreements and stuff. So things like the TPP or NAFTA or the European Union, like these are the things that I would look for to kind of enforce a more globalized world, not like military conquest.
Okay, so we have a bit of a bridge here. I share that ideal. One of the things that I find really silly as an attack on libertarians or libertarianism is that we're isolationists because we don't want to meet the world with military force, that we want more trade, more economic exchange in that sense, that would tie us together. And that's where I see governments as the single greatest impediment, that if you want a world greater connected in commerce, that removing government barriers, if anything, making government more open. And I get the temptation of saying, well, let's have one world government then, and absolute freedom of travel within that. I think you'd be better off, and I think we're more realistically going to achieve that world that's great when you have government localized, and it's easier to stand up against it and assert economic rights and trade rights, and that you wouldn't have government as an impediment to trade between individuals or collective.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I understand. I just totally disagree. But I mean, I understand your point.
Well, so that really it's cool to see it through that lens, because when you and I both take that approach of how do we create a world that's more globally connected, you go to let's create a one world government, let's use the force of authority to do that. And I say let's decentralize, let's get government out of the way and let individuals interact voluntarily.
Okay.
I think my position viewed from that lens looks even more consistent.
Gotcha.
Next up, we are going to try to fly through as many questions as we have left. So,
Yep.
Island
I got
Online.
about 8 minutes, just so you know. So, okay.
You bet. I'm going to try to wrap up even just a couple minutes before that to give you a cushion. So we have
Yep.
Island Online News asked, when is war justified? So I think that was meant to be for both.
I would say when it meets the standards of defense. And I'm not a Christian, but I believe the tenets laid out in Christian just war theory give a pretty good standard for what would constitute an ethical war. But in order for a war to happen, of course, there has to be one side that's being unjust.
Gotcha.
I mean, I would say obviously in a defensive or preemptive manner if we feel like us or our interests are threatened. Although when you say our interests, that gets really vague, and I'm not sure. I don't know if I'd feel as comfortable extending it to that. But then also, if we have like a central body like the United Nations that sets standards throughout the world for what you can or cannot do, like for instance, in terms of like gassing your people, I would argue that we probably have some authority there under that larger governing body to take action. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Next up, Slam RN. Oh wait, I should ask both of you first. If you are okay with you or yourself being asked if you voted for a particular candidate in the past. Not particularly relevant to today's discussion, though it is juicy, so I'm open to it if you are, or if you want to pass on those.
No, I'm happy to answer anything about my voting record, although I haven't been able to vote. Like I said, in the last few cycles, I did vote for Ron Paul, and I registered Republican in the Republican primary to vote for Ron Paul. In 2008, as a resident in D.C., I actually voted for Cynthia McKinney. In 2004, I voted for Michael Bednarik, who was the Libertarian nominee. It was the first time.
Gotcha.
I think I voted for Ron Paul in 2008. I don't remember. It's a long time ago. And then I voted for Bernie Sanders, I think, in the primary. And then I voted for Hillary Clinton in the general.
You got it. All right, Slam RN. So Slam asked Destiny if you voted for Hillary. So open about it. Thanks so much. Thomas C. That's a juicy one. I'm a little bit nervous when I do that. Can you ask Destiny if you will be coming on to the Raj Patel show someday?
Yeah, that's what I have to go on in like 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. And then we'll do this last one. Stalin Stanislas Delongo, thanks for your question. They asked, on the topic of state violence, what's Destiny's opinion on Hassan Piker's work on this subject?
This is a meme question.
Okay, I had a feeling. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We want to just say, as a reminder, both of the gentlemen's links are down in the description. We encourage you to check out their stuff. If you want to hear more, go hit that subscribe button over there. And with that, we will wish you all a great rest of the day. Thanks for coming by. And any last goodbyes from the speakers? Thanks again for coming on, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, James, thanks, and Destiny, I appreciate your time and engaging with this. And James, if you can share our contact info, I'd appreciate it. And I really think that this has been a really good discussion, as much as it's been a little unusual for me, getting down to the heart of this and saying, do we have a universal standard of ethics that we can bring into politics? I say we can. I don't think it all has to be about means justify the ends, that there is a universal ethical standard, and for every libertarian who's been pulling out their hair every time they hear of a Ron Paul voter becoming a Bernie Sanders voter, this is the guy you got to be talking to, Destiny. So thanks for being real upfront about that.
Thanks for having me.
This has been a pleasure, guys. Thanks so much for being so diplomatic. And for the rest of you, thanks for your questions. Thanks for being here. And keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take care, everybody.
Thanks a lot.